You know, there is a very thin, often invisible line between passion and pathology. And in all my years of doing this work, I have seen people cross that line more times than I care to count. We live in a world where we are taught that love is supposed to be intense, that it is supposed to be all-consuming, and that you should fight for what you want. But there is a moment when fighting for a relationship stops being romantic and starts being criminal. And that is exactly where we found ourselves with a young woman named Sarah. When I first heard the title of the tape that the producers handed me, it stopped me in my tracks because it wasn't just about a bad breakup. It was about a 24-year-old woman who was systematically destroying her own life, risking her freedom and terrorizing a young man, all in the name of what she called love. But the hook here, the thing that really grabbed me and made me want to sit down and look this girl in the eye, was her insistence that nobody believed her side of the story. Everybody looked at the police reports, everybody looked at the restraining orders, and they saw a monster. They saw a stalker, they saw someone who was unhinged. But when I looked at the file, I saw something different. I saw a young woman who was in a tremendous amount of pain, screaming to be heard, and getting caught in a feedback loop that she didn't know how to break. When Sarah walked out onto my stage, she didn't look like the boogeyman that the police reports described. She was 24, put together, poised, and frankly, she looked like someone you would hire to run your marketing department or someone you would see studying at a coffee shop. She had this facade of total normalcy, which is often the scariest part of these situations because it masks the chaos churning underneath. She sat down in that chair, and her body language was fascinating to me right off the bat. She wasn't shrinking away. She wasn't hiding. She was leaning forward, intense, with eyes that were locked onto mine like a laser beam. She wanted validation. She was desperate for someone, anyone, to look past the label of stalker and see the human being underneath. But we have to deal with the facts before we can deal with the feelings. And the facts in this case were absolutely staggering. We are talking about a young woman who had called her ex-boyfriend, a man named Mark, over 700 times in a single week. 700 times. That is not a typo. That is a full-time job. She had shown up at his workplace, she had parked outside his apartment complex for hours on end, and she had created dozens of fake phone numbers just to bypass the blocks he had put on his phone. The central problem here wasn't just the behavior, it was a complete disconnect between her actions and her perception of reality. When I asked her why she was doing this, she didn't say she wanted to hurt him, she didn't say she was angry. She looked me dead in the eye and said she was doing it because she knew he still loved her. She said she was fighting for their future. Now, to the outside world, to Mark's family, and certainly to the local law enforcement who had already arrested her twice, this sounded like pure delusion. It sounded like erotomania, where a person believes someone is in love with them despite all evidence to the contrary. But I have learned a long time ago not to judge a book by its cover or a case by its rap sheet. I needed to understand the payoff. You have heard me say it 1,000 times. People don't do things for no reason. Even destructive behavior, even behavior that looks completely irrational, has a payoff. It feeds something. It solves a problem for the person doing it, even if the solution is toxic. So I had to ask myself, what is Sarah getting out of this? Why is she willing to go to jail just to send one more text message? I started by trying to peel back the layers of who Sarah was before Mark. This is the part of the story that usually gets lost in the sensational headlines. We see the mugshot, but we don't see the little girl who grew up feeling invisible. Sarah wasn't a monster. She was a product of a very specific set of circumstances. As I dug into her background during our initial conversations, a pattern started to emerge. A pattern of abandonment and a desperate, clawing need for control. She grew up in a home where love was conditional. It was something you had to earn, something you had to perform for, and something that could be snatched away at a moment's notice if you weren't perfect. Her father left when she was 6, and her mother, bless her heart, was working 3 jobs just to keep the lights on. Sarah spent a lot of time alone, a lot of time waiting by the window for someone to come home. That creates a blueprint in a child's mind. It teaches you that if you let someone out of your sight, they might never come back. It teaches you that you have to hold on tight, so tight that your knuckles turn white, because if you relax your grip for 1 second, you will be left alone in the dark. So you take that wounded little girl, you fast forward 18 years, and you put her in a relationship with a guy like Mark. Now, Mark was charming. He was the life of the party. When they first met, it was like a fireworks show. Sarah described it as the first time she ever felt truly seen. He showered her with attention. He texted her constantly. He wanted to know where she was, what she was doing, who she was with. In the beginning, that didn't feel like control. It felt like love. It felt like safety. For a girl who was terrified of being abandoned, having a boyfriend who was obsessed with her felt like the ultimate security blanket. They moved in together after 3 months. They were inseparable. It was that high-octane, dopamine-fueled infatuation that burns bright and fast. But the problem with burning that hot is that you eventually run out of fuel, and when the dynamics started to shift, when the honeymoon phase ended and real life set in, Sarah didn't know how to adjust. She didn't have the emotional tools to handle the natural ebb and flow of a relationship. When Mark wanted to go out with his friends, Sarah interpreted it as abandonment. When he didn't text back within 5 minutes, her brain went into a panic response that was rooted in that 6-year-old girl waiting by the window. This is where the escalation began. And this is where the story gets complicated, because it wasn't just Sarah acting in a vacuum. The narrative that had been sold to the public was that Mark broke up with her, cut ties, and Sarah just couldn't let go. That was the story the police had, and that was the story Mark's family was telling. But as I sat there listening to Sarah, listening to the tremor in her voice as she tried to explain herself, I started to realize that there was a piece of the puzzle missing. She kept saying, "He talks to me, Dr. Phil. He answers me." The audience groaned when she said that. They thought she was hallucinating. They thought she was hearing voices. But I looked at her and I saw a level of detail in her eyes that told me she wasn't making it up, she wasn't crazy, she was confused. She was reacting to signals that were mixed, inconsistent, and incredibly damaging. I remember leaning forward in my chair, resting my elbows on my knees, and lowering my voice. I asked her to walk me through the breakup. She told me it happened 6 months ago. Mark had said he needed space. He said she was too intense, too suffocating. He packed his bags and left. But here is the kicker. That very same night, after he had blocked her number, after he had told her it was over, he showed up at her apartment at 2 a.m. He cried in her arms. He told her he was confused. He slept in her bed. And then the next morning, he was gone again, and the block was back on the phone. This was the cycle. This was the catalyst. You cannot expect a person who is already prone to anxiety and abandonment issues to process that kind of whiplash rationally. You have to understand the psychology of what was happening in that apartment at 2 a.m. because it is the key to unlocking this entire nightmare. In psychology, we call this intermittent reinforcement. It is the most powerful addiction enabler on the planet. Think about a slot machine in Vegas. If you pulled the handle and never won, you would walk away after 5 minutes. If you pulled the handle and won every single time, you would get bored. But if you pull that handle and win just every once in a while, unpredictably, Randomly, you will sit there until you have spent your last dime. You will sit there until you starve. That is exactly what Mark was doing to Sarah. He was the slot machine. He would block her, ignore her, treat her like a criminal for 3 weeks, and then boom, he would show up with flowers or send a text that said, "I miss you," or spend the night. And just like that gambler, Sarah was hooked. She was pulling the lever again and again, enduring the pain and the silence just for that one hit of affection that proved she wasn't crazy. But the world didn't see the 2 a.m. visits. The world didn't see the soft text he sent and then deleted before his friends could see them. All the world saw was Sarah spinning out of control. And let me tell you, she was spinning. When you are in that state of high anxiety, your frontal lobe, the part of your brain that says, hey, maybe this isn't a good idea, or hey, maybe this is illegal, that part shuts down. You are operating purely on the amygdala, the fear center. You are in fight or flight mode 24 hours a day. For Sarah, fighting meant trying to reestablish contact by any means necessary. This is where the behavior escalated from heartbroken ex to criminal harassment. And I'm not going to sugarcoat it. What she was doing was terrifying. She wasn't just calling. She started using technology to bypass his boundaries. She downloaded apps that allowed her to spoof her phone number. So Mark would look at his phone and see a call coming from his mother or his boss or the local pizza place. He would answer, thinking it was safe, and it would be Sarah on the other line, crying, begging, or sometimes just breathing. She told me she did it because she just needed to hear his voice to calm her own anxiety. She said, "Doctor, Phil, if I could just hear him say hello, I could breathe again." But to Mark and to anyone looking at this objectively, that is psychological warfare. It is an invasion of privacy that makes a person feel like the walls are closing in. Things got worse when she started physically tracking him. She admitted to me that she had figured out his passwords because, remember, they had lived together, they had shared a life, and she was logging into his cloud accounts to see where he was. She would show up at the bar where he was having a drink. She would park down the street from the gym he went to. She wasn't approaching him every time. Sometimes she just sat in her car watching. She called it checking on him. She told herself she was being a protective girlfriend, making sure he was safe. That is the narrative she spun to keep her own sanity intact. If she admitted to herself that she was stalking him, she would have to face the fact that she had become the villain in her own story. So instead, she reframed it. In her head, she was the guardian angel, not the predator. The inevitable happened about 2 months before she wrote to my show. Mark called the police. Now, I have worked with law enforcement for decades, and they have a very difficult job when it comes to domestic disputes. They deal with facts, not feelings. They showed up, saw the call logs, saw the text messages, thousands of them, and they saw a guy who looked terrified. They arrested Sarah. They put her in handcuffs, put her in the back of a squad car, and took her down to the station for booking. You would think that would be the rock bottom. You would think the cold reality of a jail cell, the fingerprinting, the mugshot, you would think that would snap a person out of the delusion. But it didn't. And here is why. Because even after the arrest, even after the restraining order was served, Mark reached out again. Sarah told me this during our pre-interview, and I admit I was skeptical. It is the classic stalker defense. He wants me really, he's just playing hard to get. But Sarah had kept the receipts. She had a voicemail on her phone from a blocked number, time-stamped 3 days after her arrest. I listened to it. It was Mark. He sounded drunk, he sounded sad, and he said, "I'm sorry it had to be this way, Sarah. I just don't know what to do. I still love you, but you're crazy." That message was gasoline on the fire. To Sarah, that wasn't a goodbye. That was a cry for help. It was validation. It reinforced her belief that the legal system, her friends, his friends, everyone was wrong. They didn't understand the special bond they had. She convinced herself that Mark was being pressured by his family to press charges that he was a victim too. So instead of backing off, she doubled down. She violated the restraining order within 48 hours. She sent him a letter. She didn't threaten him. She wrote him a love letter explaining that she forgave him for calling the cops. This is when her support system completely collapsed. Her friends, who had tried to be sympathetic in the beginning, couldn't take it anymore. They looked at her and saw someone they didn't recognize. They told her, "Sarah, you are going to prison. You need to stop." When she tried to explain that Mark was still calling her, they rolled their eyes. They didn't believe her. Why would they? Mark was publicly posting about how scared he was, playing the role of the victim perfectly on social media. He was getting sympathy from the entire town. Sarah was getting labeled as the psycho ex-girlfriend. She lost her job because she was so consumed with tracking Mark that she stopped showing up. And when she did show up, she was a nervous wreck. Her mother was threatening to kick her out of the house. She was completely isolated. And isolation is a dangerous place for a mind that is already untethered. When you have no one to reality check you, your delusions become your reality. She felt like she was screaming into a void. She felt like she was in a glass box pounding on the walls and everyone outside was just pointing and laughing. That is a level of psychological torment that can break a person. That is why she wrote to me. She didn't write to me saying, "Dr. Phil, help me stop stalking my ex." She wrote to me saying, "Dr. Phil, help me prove to the world that I'm not crazy. Help me prove that he is lying." She wanted a platform. She wanted vindication. She came to Hollywood not to get treatment, but to win the argument. She brought boxes of evidence, printed screenshots, phone bills, recordings. She was ready to go to war in the court of public opinion because she had lost everywhere else. When I walked into the green room before the show to say hello, the tension was palpable. She had her files spread out on the table like she was preparing for a Supreme Court case. She was manic, talking a mile a minute. Did you see the text from April? Did you see the timestamp on the call? She was desperate for me to look at the papers. I put a hand on her shoulder and said, "Sarah, I'm not the judge, and this isn't a trial. I don't care about the papers right now. I care about you. I care about why you are willing to burn your life to the ground for a man who put you in handcuffs." She froze. For a split second, the frantic energy dropped, and I saw the exhaustion. She looked like she hadn't slept in a month. Her eyes welled up, but she blinked it away instantly. The walls went back up. "Because he loves me," she said, her voice hard again, "and I'm going to prove it." I knew then that we were in for a rough ride. I knew that getting through to her was going to require more than just logic. You can't use logic to talk someone out of a position they didn't use logic to get into. This was emotional. This was primal. And to make matters worse, I knew something she didn't know. My producers had been working around the clock. We had reached out to Mark. We had reached out to the police. And most importantly, we had done a forensic analysis of the proof she was clutching in her hands. I walked onto that stage knowing that I had to shatter her reality before I could help her rebuild it. It is never easy to do that. It is painful to look someone in the face and tell them that their entire world is built on sand, but that is the job. You have to lance the boil to get the infection out. Sarah sat there under the bright lights, defiant, chin up, waiting for her moment of glory. She thought she was the hero of this story. She had no idea that she was about to face the hardest conversation of her life. The escalation phase was over. We were heading straight for the confrontation, and there was nowhere left to hide. The audience was silent, the kind of silence that feels heavy, like the air has been sucked out of the room. Sarah was sitting there, gripping the armrests of her chair, her knuckles white. She had just finished laying out her case, passionately explaining to everyone that Mark was sending her secret messages through song lyrics on his Spotify playlist, and that his silence was just a test of her loyalty. To her, it made perfect sense. To everyone else, it sounded like madness. I leaned forward, looking her dead in the eye. "Sarah," I said, my voice dropping an octave, "I want you to take a breath. I want you to listen to me very carefully." She nodded, her eyes wide, expecting me to agree with her, expecting me to say, "Yes, Sarah, you are right, and the world is wrong." "I have looked at your evidence," I started. "I have looked at the phone records. I have looked at the text. I paused for effect, and I have also spoken to Mark." Her head snapped up. "You talked to him? What did he say? Did he tell you about the voicemail?" "He did," I said, "and we are going to get to that. But first, we need to deal with the here and now. Sarah, you are facing felony stalking charges. You are facing up to 5 years in prison. Do you understand that?" "I know," she said dismissively, "but once the judge sees the truth, there is no truth that makes what you are doing legal." I cut in, sharp and loud. "Let's be very clear about this. You are not a detective. You are not a guardian angel. You are terrifying this young man." "I'm not terrifying him," she shot back, defensive now. "He loves me." "Does he?" I asked. I signaled to the control room, "Roll the tape." On the giant screen behind us, a video began to play. It was Mark. He wasn't sitting in a studio. He was recording himself on a cell phone, looking haggard, unshaven, and exhausted. He looked directly into the camera. "Sarah," Mark said on the screen, his voice shaking, "please, stop. I don't love you. I am afraid of you. I can't sleep. I can't go to work. I check my back seat every time I get in my car because I'm scared you're hiding there. My mom is scared. Please, just leave me alone." The video ended. The studio was dead silent. I watched Sarah's face. I expected tears. I expected shock. But instead, she stared at the blank screen, her expression unreadable, almost frozen. Then, slowly, a small smile crept onto her lips. "He looks so tired," she whispered. "He needs me to take care of him." A gasp rippled through the audience. I felt a chill go down my own spine. This was the depth of the delusion we were dealing with. She had filtered out every word he said, "Stop, afraid, leave me alone," and only saw what she wanted to see, a connection. "Sarah," I said, my voice stern now, cutting through her fantasy. "Did you hear what he said? He said he is afraid of you. He is not sending you a code. He is begging for his life." "He has to say that," she insisted, turning back to me, her eyes pleading. "Don't you get it? His parents are probably in the next room making him say that. He's trapped." "He isn't trapped." I slammed my hand on the table, making her jump. "He is trapped by you. You are the trap, Sarah." I knew I had to play my trump card. I had to address the mixed signals because that was the one thread she was hanging on to. That was her lifeline. "You keep talking about the mixed signals," I said, softening my tone just a fraction. "You talk about the voicemail, the late night visits." "Yes," she cried. "See, you believe me." "I believe that Mark has been weak," I said plainly. "I believe he has been inconsistent. I believe that he has at times fed this monster because he was lonely or confused or maybe just flattered that someone was this obsessed with him. That is on him. That is his failure." She looked vindicated for a split second. But I held up a finger. That does not give you a license to hunt him. Just because someone leaves a door unlocked doesn't mean you have the right to walk in and steal their furniture. Just because he sent a mixed signal 3 months ago doesn't mean you can ignore a restraining order today. I pulled out a document from my folder. We had a forensic expert look at the secret messages you claim he's sending, the Spotify playlists, the hang-up calls. I looked at her. Sarah, 70% of those calls, they weren't from him. She blinked. What? They were robocalls, I said. Telemarketers. Wrong numbers. We traced them. And the Spotify playlist? That playlist was created 4 years ago, before he even met you. You are connecting dots that do not exist. You are building a castle in the sky, and you are living in it alone. I saw the first crack in her armor then. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. She looked down at her hands. The certainty was wavering. You are 24 years old, I continued, leaning in close. You are bright, you are articulate, you have your whole life ahead of you. But right now, you are standing on the edge of a cliff. If you take one more step, if you send one more text, make one more drive-by, you are going to fall. And you are going to fall into a concrete cell where no one cares about your feelings. I paused, letting the reality of that sink in. Is that what you want? Do you want to be an inmate? Or do you want to be a woman who reclaimed her life? She started to cry then. Not the angry, defensive tears from before, but the deep, racking sobs of someone who is finally realizing they are lost. I just don't want to be alone, she choked out. If I stop fighting for him, then I have nothing. I'm nobody. There it was. The breakthrough. The aha moment. It wasn't about Mark. It never was. It was about the void inside her. Mark was just the drug she was using to fill it. You are not nobody, I said firmly, my voice filled with compassion now. You are somebody who is hurting. You are somebody who was taught a lie a long time ago that you have to force people to love you or they will leave. That is the lie, Sarah. That is the ghost you are chasing. I stood up and walked over to her chair. I don't do that often, but I felt she needed to feel a presence that wasn't threatening. I sat on the edge of her table. I can't make Mark love you, I said softly. And frankly, you shouldn't want him to. A relationship built on fear and surveillance isn't love. It's a hostage situation. But I can help you learn to love yourself enough that you don't need to beg for crumbs from anyone else. She looked up at me, mascara running down her face, looking like that little girl waiting by the window again. How? She whispered. I don't know how to stop. It's like an itch in my brain. If I don't check his location, I feel like I'm going to die. That is called addiction, I said. And we treat addiction. We don't criminalize it, we treat it. But you have to be willing to walk away. You have to be willing to hand over your phone, hand over your passwords, and go into a program where you can detox from this person. I look toward the backstage area. I have arranged for you to go to one of the best dual diagnosis treatment centers in the country. They specialize in obsessive disorders and trauma. They are ready to take you today. Right now. But here is the deal. If you go, you have to commit. No phone, no internet, no Mark. You have to go cold turkey. The audience held its breath. This was the moment of truth. The offer was on the table. And if I don't? She asked, her voice trembling. If you don't, I said, then I am going to hand over everything we found today to the district attorney. Because I will not sit here and watch you destroy a young man's life and your own. I will help you get better, or I will help society be safe from you. The choice is yours. It was a hard line, but it was the only line. Tough love isn't about being mean. It's about setting boundaries when someone cannot set them for themselves. Sarah sat there for a long minute. I could see the war raging in her head. The addiction was screaming at her to run, to keep fighting, to hold on to the fantasy. But the rational part of her, the part that I had just woken up, was fighting back. She looked at the screen where Mark's face had been. She looked at the audience. And finally, she looked at me. "I'm tired," she said quietly. "I'm so tired of chasing him." "Then stop running," I said. "Let us carry you for a while." She nodded slowly. A collective sigh of relief swept through the room. "Okay," she said, "I'll go." It wasn't a jubilant victory. It was a surrender. But in my line of work, surrender is often the first step toward victory. We got her backstage immediately. I didn't want to give her time to change her mind. My staff was waiting with the transport. We took her phone, which she handed over with shaking hands, like she was giving away a limb, and we put her in the car. But the story doesn't end when the car drives away. That is just the beginning of the real work. Television makes it look like the yes is the finish line, but anyone who has dealt with mental health knows that recovery is a long, messy, non-linear road. About 4 months later, I got an update on Sarah. It wasn't the fairy tale ending that people always want, but it was real. It was grounded. The report from the treatment center was honest, which is exactly what I wanted to see. Sarah hadn't been an easy patient. The first 2 weeks, she went through withdrawal that looked physical. She paced the halls. She bargained with the staff for 5 minutes of internet access. She tried to manipulate other patients into letting her use their phones. It was ugly. It was the raw, screaming nerve of addiction being exposed to the air. But they held the line. They didn't give in. And slowly, agonizingly, the fog began to lift. Without the constant dopamine hits of checking Mark's social media, without the adrenaline of the chase, Sarah was forced to sit with her own feeling. She had to sit with the loneliness she had been running from since she was 6 years old. She had to face the grief of her childhood, the fear that she was unlovable. That is a terrifying thing to face, but it is the only way out. You have to feel it to heal it. The therapist worked with her on something called dialectical behavior therapy, or DBT. It teaches you how to tolerate distress without acting on impulse. It teaches you that just because you feel like you are going to die without that text message, it doesn't mean you actually will. Sarah had to learn to ride the wave of her anxiety without crashing her boat into the rocks. 6 months after she left my stage, Sarah was discharged. She didn't go back to her old apartment. She moved to a different city, closer to a supportive aunt who understood the boundaries that needed to be in place. She got a job, not in a high-stress corporate environment, but at a library. Quiet, structured, predictable. It was exactly what her nervous system needed. I reached out to check on her 1 year later. We didn't do a big televised follow-up because, frankly, putting her back in the spotlight would have been dangerous for her recovery. But we spoke on the phone. Her voice was different. It was lower, steadier. The frantic, manic energy was gone. "Dr. Phil," she said, "I won't lie to you. I still think about him. Sometimes, late at night, my thumb automatically goes to where the Instagram app used to be on my phone. That's normal," I told her. "That's muscle memory. The question is, what do you do next?" "I put the phone down," she said. "I get a glass of water, and I remind myself that checking on him is an act of violence against myself." That statement right there, an act of violence against myself, told me she had truly internalized the lesson. She wasn't staying away just because of the law. She was staying away because she finally valued her own peace more than the chaos. Mark, for his part, was finally able to move on. Once the calls stopped, once the shadow lifted, he got his life back. He got married a few years later. Sarah heard about it through the grapevine. A few years ago, that news would have sent her spiraling into a rage or a suicidal depression. This time, she told me she felt a pang of sadness. She cried for an hour, and then she went to work. That, my friends, is what success looks like. It isn't erasing the past, it is learning to live with it without letting it control you. But this story isn't just about Sarah. It is a cautionary tale for our entire culture. We are living in an age where technology has eroded the boundaries of privacy and made obsession easier than ever. You don't have to hide in the bushes anymore. You can stalk someone from the comfort of your couch. We have normalized creeping on exes. We joke about it. But for people with the psychological vulnerability that Sarah had, these tools are weapons. They enable the darkest parts of our nature. I think about the thousands of other Sarahs out there, and the Marks too. I think about the people who are stuck in that loop of intermittent reinforcement, confusing pain for passion, confusing control for love. Sarah was lucky she got caught. She got an intervention. She got resources that most people never see. But for every Sarah we help on this show, there are countless others suffering in silence, convinced that if they just send one more text, everything will be okay. When I look back on this case, I don't see a criminal. I see a survivor of a broken emotional system. Sarah had to break completely before she could be put back together. It reminds me of why I do this job. It's not for the ratings, and it's certainly not for the critics who say we exploit people. It's for that moment when the light comes back on in someone's eyes. It's for the moment when a young woman realizes she doesn't have to be a prisoner of her own mind. Sarah is still single today, by choice. She told me she is learning to date herself first. She is learning to be the partner to herself that she always wanted someone else to be. And that is the most important relationship any of us will ever have. If you can't be happy with yourself, you will never be happy with anyone else. You will just be using them to fill a bucket with a hole in the bottom. So the next time you hear a story about a crazy stalker, take a beat. Don't just look at the mugshot. Ask yourself what happened to that person to make them believe that love is a war they have to win. Ask yourself what pain is driving that behavior. Because until we understand the why, we can never fix the what. Sarah's journey from a jail cell to a library, from obsession to peace, is proof that no one is beyond redemption. No one is too far gone. But you have to be willing to do the work. You have to be willing to let go of the fantasy to grab hold of reality. And reality, while it might be boring sometimes, is the only place where you can build a life worth living. As I closed the file on Sarah, I felt that familiar mix of exhaustion and satisfaction. We did good work that day. We stopped a train wreck that was happening in slow motion. And sometimes that is enough. Sometimes just stopping the bleeding is the victory. And that's the truth. Think about that for a second. We stop the bleeding, but scars remain. And in psychology, we talk a lot about resilience, about bouncing back, but we don't talk enough about the scar tissue that forms over the wound. That tissue is tougher, less flexible, but it's stronger. Sarah is tougher now. She isn't the same soft, permeable girl who let the world walk right through her. She has boundaries now. And boundaries are nothing more than the distance at which I can love you and love myself simultaneously. She learned that the hard way. I remember sitting in my office long after the lights in the studio had gone down, reflecting on the broader implications of Sarah's case. It wasn't just an isolated incident. It was a symptom of a society that has lost the ability to let go. We are told to never give up, but nobody teaches us when to give up, Nobody teaches us the grace of release. We equate quitting with failure. But in relationships, sometimes quitting is the ultimate act of self-preservation. Sarah thought she was being a warrior for love. She didn't realize she was a mercenary for her own destruction. And let's not forget the role of the family in this. Sarah's mother, who I spoke to briefly backstage, had been enabling this behavior for years, not out of malice, but out of fear. She was afraid that if she challenged Sarah, Sarah would shatter. So she walked on eggshells. She paid the phone bills. She listened to the endless rants about Mark. She became a co-conspirator in the delusion because it was easier than facing the explosion that would come from the truth. This is what we call an identified patient in family therapy. Sarah was the sick one, yes, but the whole system was sick. The whole system was feeding the pathology. When we sent Sarah away, we also had to have a tough conversation with her mother. We told her, "You are fired. You are fired from being her crisis manager. You are fired from being her bank. You have to love her enough to let her fall." That is the hardest thing for a parent to hear. It goes against every instinct you have. But if you cushion every fall, your child never learns that the ground is hard. They never learn to pick themselves up. Sarah's mother had to learn to say no and mean it. She had to learn that no is a complete sentence. I often wonder where Sarah would be if she hadn't come on the show. The trajectory was clear. The escalation was exponential. Without intervention, the next step wasn't just another arrest, it was violence. Either she would have hurt Mark in a fit of passion, or she would have hurt herself when the reality finally crashed down on her. We see it on the news every night, crimes of passion that leave families destroyed. Sarah was on that highway doing 100 miles an hour in the wrong direction. We didn't just change her lane, we took the keys away until she learned how to drive. There is a lesson here for everyone reading this. It's about the lies we tell ourselves. We all do it. We tell ourselves that this job will get better, that this person will change, that if we just try harder, we can control the outcome. But the only thing you can control is yourself. The only behavior you can change is your own. Sarah wasted years trying to change Mark's mind, trying to rewrite a script that had already ended. Imagine what she could have done with that energy if she had poured it into herself. Imagine the mountains she could have moved. Now, she is moving those mountains one shovelful at a time. It's not glamorous. It's not a movie ending. It's quiet work. It's waking up every day and choosing sanity. It's choosing to live in the real world with all its disappointments and its beauty, rather than in a fantasy world where you are the queen of a kingdom that doesn't exist. I am proud of her. Not because she is perfect, she isn't, but because she is real, she is present, she is no longer a ghost haunting her own life. And that is what this show is about. It's about waking up, it's about turning on the lights and seeing the monsters for what they are, just shadows on the wall. So when you find yourself obsessing, when you find yourself checking that profile for the 10th time or driving past that house, I want you to hear my voice in your head. I want you to ask yourself, what is the payoff? What am I getting out of this pain? And if the answer is nothing good, then it's time to stop. It's time to put the phone down. It's time to walk away. Because you deserve to be the star of your own life, not a supporting character in someone else's tragedy. Sarah made it out. You can too.